Penguin Random House presents 1947 to 1957 India, the Birth of a Republic by Chandrachur Ghose. Read by J Haldar. Chapter 1. The Transfer of Power. By 8:20 a.m. on 15th August 1947, the ministers-designate of the Dominion of India, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, had taken their seats on each side of the two red-canopied thrones placed at an elevated level in the Darbar Hall of the Government House, now the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The swearing-in ceremony began soon after Lord Mountbatten of Burma and his wife, preceded by 10 Indian and British aides-de-camp, entered the hall at 8:30 a.m. sharp and walked up to the throne, with trumpets blowing from the upper gallery. The program began with the Home Secretary R.N. Banerjee reading out the Royal Commission, the message from the King of England to Lord Mountbatten. "We do, by this our commission, under our sign manual, appoint you, Lord Mountbatten, to be, during our pleasure, Governor-General of India." It was then the turn of the Chief Justice of India, Hiralal J. Kania, to administer the oath to Mountbatten. "I will well and truly serve His Majesty King George VI, his heirs and successors in the office of Governor-General of India." Mountbatten swore. It was then his turn to administer the oath to the 12 ministers of the new dominion. On the dome of the Darbar Hall fluttered the Indian national flag, the Governor-General's deep blue flag, the Star of India flag, and Queen Victoria's standard. India was now free. The era of the British Raj was over. Yet, uncomfortable questions that kept floating around couldn't be wished away. What made the Indian National Congress, India's largest and most representative political organization, sacrifice its long-held goals to accept a partitioned India and the status of being a dominion of the British Empire? As 1941 prepared to make way for 1942, the Japanese war machine began the process of steamrolling the Allied military forces occupying the Southeast Asian countries. Japs opened war on US with bombing of Hawaii, screamed the front page of the Los Angeles Times on 8th December 1941. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service had launched a surprise attack on the naval base of the United States of America in Pearl Harbor early in the morning on 7th December. Both the US and Britain declared war on Japan. For Japan, there was no looking back. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese forces took Bangkok on 8th December, Hong Kong on 25th December, Borneo on 31st December, Manila on 3rd January 1942, Singapore on 15th February, Rangoon on 7th March, Java on 8th March, and Sumatra by 28th March. According to historians Christopher Bailey and Tim Harper, there are few parallels in history to this sudden and dramatic humiliation of an old and complacent supremacy, the British Empire in Asia, by an underrated and even despised enemy. The unkindest cut was the fall of Singapore, where the British naval base and the fortress, considered impregnable, had been built at a cost of £30 million. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, described it as a heavy and far-reaching military defeat. With the fall of Singapore on 15th February 1942, Japanese Premier Hideki Tojo referred to India in his speech to the House of Peers the very next day, arguing that the fall of Singapore was an excellent opportunity for India to break off from Britain's callous domination and to join in the establishment of the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. He continued, "The Japanese Empire wishes India to be an Indian's India, and she is anxious to see that she is restored to past greatness. In this, Japan will offer her all help and assistance.
If India abandons her tradition and history and forgets her missions under the spell of Britain's power and propaganda, and continues to follow her, then I shall feel very sorry for the Indian people for wasting this God-sent opportunity."
The beginning of the war in September 1939 had already imparted a new momentum to the nationalist movement in India. Even before the war had started, radical leaders like Subhash Chandra Bose had raised the demand for a 6-month ultimatum for the British Raj at the beginning of the year. Bose, with support from the leftists in the Congress and the youth organizations, escalated the pressure for a mass movement to set up a provisional national government and force the end of the Raj, as he saw a golden opportunity in the war situation. Not ready for such drastic measures, the Gandhian leaders of the Indian National Congress restricted themselves to announcing their opposition to the colonial government's decision to make India a party to the war and exploiting her manpower and resources to support the Allied war efforts. The Congress called upon the British government to clarify its stand on democracy and imperialism because India cannot associate herself in a war said to be for the democratic freedom when that very freedom is denied to her. If Great Britain fights for the maintenance and extension of democracy, then she must necessarily end imperialism in her own possessions, establish full democracy in India, and the Indian people must have the right of self-determination by framing their own constitution through a constituent assembly, the Congress Working Committee CWC declared. In response, the Viceroy Marquis of Linlithgow reiterated on 17th October the British government's stated policy that India would gradually attain the status of a dominion in the British Empire. Towards that end, the British government would be willing to hold consultations with Indians at the end of the war to further reform the Government of India Act of 1935. For the moment, the government could only offer to set up a consultative group comprising representatives of major Indian political parties and of the princes for association of public opinion in India with the conduct of the war and with questions relating to war activities. This consultative committee would be presided over by the Viceroy himself and meet at his invitation. Unhappy with the government's response, the Working Committee directed the Congress ministries and the provinces to resign by the end of the month. At the same time, it warned congressmen against any hasty action in the shape of civil disobedience, political strikes, and the like. In keeping with the true spirit of Satyagraha, the Working Committee decided that it would continue to explore the means of arriving at an honourable settlement even though the British government has banged the door in the face of the Congress. Consequent to the resignation of the Congress ministries, the administration in those provinces were taken over by the respective governors under Section 93 of the Government of India Act. The Congress also refused to accept an offer from the Viceroy to join his Executive Council along with representatives of the Muslim League and other groups, in the absence of a declaration on India's freedom and the setting up of a constituent assembly based on adult suffrage. The British government continued to highlight the communal problem in India as the chief barrier to any progressive move. On 3rd April 1940, the Secretary of State for India, Marquis of Zetland, announced, "I am convinced that no lasting settlement in India will prove possible without real reconciliation between Muslims and Hindus. Let me say that whatever the difficulties standing in the way, we shall continue to labour wholeheartedly and to the best of our ability for such a reconciliation. The goal we have set ourselves is to aid the people of India to acquire a measure of political unity which will enable her to take her place as a great self-governing dominion in the British Commonwealth of Nations." The idea of dominion status, however, was not acceptable to the Congress. At its annual session held at Ramgarh in March 1940, the Congress declared that Indian freedom cannot exist within the orbit of imperialism and dominion status, or any other status within the imperial structure is wholly inapplicable to India, is not in keeping with the dignity of a whole nation, and would bind India in many ways to British politics and economic structure. Explaining his individual position, Gandhi wrote in the Harijan that although the idea of dominion status with the right to secede from the British Empire was acceptable to him earlier, he now believed that it was no more suitable for India. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, in the meantime, continued to press his point harder.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?